So in the year 2025, Americans are drinking less than ever before. And if you're a home bartender like myself, then you're probably interested about this topic. If so, then this is the correct video for you. My name is Ron Verpin. I'm a full-time medical doctor, and I've been a home bartender for over 5 years now. During that time, I've learned how to make over 100 different cocktails and I've thrown over 50 cocktail parties. And I teach other busy professionals how to make cocktails at home. And in this video, I'm going to be tackling that very important and relevant topic about how Americans today are drinking less than in previous years, definitely less than in any other point in my own lifetime. And I know for a fact this is true in the United States, but I'm sure this is true in other parts of the Western world and maybe other parts of the world in general as well. So just some background. I actually learned how to home bartend in June. I started my journey in June 2020. So I learned in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was actually a time when people drank more than ever before. Even though bars and nightclubs and restaurants and going out to drink was not allowed because of all the lockdowns and shutdowns and things like that, people were still drinking more than ever. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that mental health was at an all-time low. People were more socially isolated, and people were just at home more. They either lost their jobs and had to be at home, or they switched over to work from home. So because of all those things, people were working from home. People were more socially isolated. People were more anxious, depressed, and had poor mental health. All of those things led to an increase in the amount of alcohol that people drank. And that was actually one of the reasons, the whole thing about how bars and nightclubs were closed, that was actually the reason that I got into home bartending. Because I knew that in 2020, I actually moved to a new city. That's when I started my medical residency, and I wanted to make new friends and with other people in my program. And the thing is, there was no social gatherings, there was no going out to bars, there was no going out to restaurants and all that stuff. It was just a lot less safe to do things back then because of risk of exposure to the COVID-19 virus. So what I did was I learned home bartending, and I invited a closer, smaller group of people over to my apartment so that we can have drinks together and socialize and build friendships and all those great things too. So because of the social isolation of COVID and the fact that you couldn't go out as much, that's what actually led me into home bartending. And that was the era when people were drinking more than ever. If you fast forward just 5 years to this year, 2025, people are actually drinking less than in 2020 and even less than in pre-pandemic times as well. Certainly less than any other time in my lifetime. And I think this data even goes back to before my lifetime, the 60s, 70s, 80s, things like that. And if you're into home bartending or you're starting to get into home bartending, you may be a little bit concerned. People are not drinking as much. Is this a worthwhile hobby to learn? And I'll share my thoughts about that whole thing now. So first of all, why are people drinking less? I think there's actually a couple of reasons. One is that even though bars and nightclubs and all those places where people drink are open now compared to in 2020, people lived without them for essentially 1 to 2 years, depending on what part of the country you lived in and how things opened up, or what part of the world you lived in, for example. So people got by without those things. So they learned how to have fun and be social and build friendships and all those things without having to go to those places. So people aren't going out as much to bars and nightclubs. So even though those things are open, people are not going out to them as much as they did in pre-pandemic times. There's also the whole thing about social media. Social media is now way bigger in 2025 than even in 2020 or 2015, for example. What that means is that people aren't needing to go out and interact with people in person and have drinks with other people in person in order to get that social connection. They can get it oftentimes online, and they can even form parasocial relationships where they don't necessarily know a certain person, but like you watch their YouTube video or you watch their Instagram reels and you feel like, they're your friend even though you've never actually interacted with them. So you get some degree of human interaction, although it's through a screen. You get some degree of that through social media. So there's less of a need to go out and get that at a bar or a nightclub or any type of social event. This could also be a concert or a picnic in the park or any of these kind of things where, people might tend to drink more. So there's just less of that. There's less of those big social interactions where alcohol is going to be a part of the event. The other thing, because of COVID-19, people started to take their health a lot more seriously after that. And this is in large part, especially due to I'm a millennial, but the generation younger than me is Gen Z. These guys really started to prioritize health a lot more. And that's actually bled over into my generation and other generations as well, where we start to take care of ourselves and we care a lot more about health. And even though I love home bartending, I love cocktails, I love mixology, I love all this stuff, even I have to admit that alcohol is unhealthy. If you do it in moderation, just 1 or 2 drinks a day, that's fine. But any amount of alcohol is to some degree unhealthy. It's just something that you essentially have to, if you want the enjoyment of cocktails and of the social interactions and things like that, you just have to put up with it. And on this channel, I promote responsible drinking just 1 or 2 drinks every now and then with your friends as a way to connect with, your friends, your family, your partner, and other people that you care about. So I promote more of that responsible drinking, but obviously people take it the other way around. And even if you drink responsibly, to some extent, it is still unhealthy. As I said in the intro to this video, I'm a full-time medical doctor. I'm going to be the first to tell you that alcohol in any amount is unhealthy. Obviously, if you do it less, then that sort of negates that effect. If you do it less frequently and less drinks each time. But people care more about their health now, especially because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So really, there's a lot of these downstream, or I would say long-term downstream effects of the whole COVID-19 pandemic. People are way more health conscious now than they were before the COVID-19 pandemic. People are going out and interacting and having social interactions in public and things like that a lot less now. Social media is a lot bigger now. So all of these things that stemmed from COVID-19 have led to people drinking less. So what does that mean for me and you all that are interested in home bartending, call yourself home bartenders, especially if you're aspiring to be a home bartender or you're early on, but even if you're more like myself and you're intermediate, advanced, highly advanced, whatever the case may be. Is home bartending still a valuable hobby? I would think that it absolutely is. And there are a couple of reasons why. One is that I touched on this earlier, but people care more about responsible drinking because they care more about their health. So home bartending is really the way to do that. When people go to events when, let's say it's a house party and there's no cocktails, it's just bottles of alcohol or cans of beer or canned cocktails and things like that. There's a lot less portion control and people tend to get a lot more drunk. At least that's what I've noticed from my own experience. And so that goes against responsible drinking. So why does home bartending go towards responsible drinking? One is that when you're making cocktails for other people, it's sort of a controlled environment. You can only make so many cocktails in so much time. And when you hand somebody a cocktail, it's far easier to count your drinks. So it's a lot easier to be responsible. People can oftentimes go to parties and house party, for example, that I host, and they can just say, before they go into the party, they can just say, I want to have 2 drinks. And if you do it with cocktails, it's a lot easier to count your drinks than if it's just, bottles of alcohol lying out and you just pour it into a solo cup or whatever the case may be. And when you do these house parties, they're also more controlled environments and, people going out and drinking, and then things, one thing leads to another essentially in terms of how much alcohol you have when you go out. Those kind of environments a lot of times lead to less responsible drinking because you're also in that peer pressure environment of the club. You're trying to take drinks with other people, maybe people that you just met. So, all that goes against responsible drinking. I think home bartending is where you get the real responsible drinking because you can count your drinks a lot more easier. You have less social pressure because you're at a house party with people that you're not at some unknown entity or some like a public place, for example. So it's a lot more responsible drinking. Then the second thing is that I would say, so why is home bartending still important when people are drinking less? One is that it leads to more responsible drinking. And 2 is that it facilitates more of these house party style events because people are not as interested in 2025 to go out to clubs and bars and all that stuff. And you can just look at all the data, at least in the United States, nightclub, there's all this rumors and stuff. I live in Las Vegas, which is the nightclub capital of the United States and one of the nightclub capitals of the entire world. People are always saying, tourism in Las Vegas is down, nightclubs are dying, less people are going to bars, less people are going to these big events that the casinos are throwing in town. So that's true not just in Vegas, but in New York, LA, Miami, other big cities in the United States, other big cities in the Western world and throughout the rest of the world as well. So people prefer actually to do more of these house parties because that's essentially what the interactions they had during the whole COVID-19 pandemic were. You were only allowed to interact with a few close family members and friends. You weren't allowed to go out to nightclubs and these big events and things like that. You weren't allowed to travel. So really people tended to gravitate towards more of these house parties, these smaller events. And home bartending is really that's really what facilitates that. If you know how to home bartend, then you can throw those small parties. You can have just 5, 10, 15 people over. You don't have to go to a nightclub that's packed with hundreds and hundreds of people. People tend to prefer this kind of stuff. So I think home bartending, because of these two reasons, it still has a role. Because people are going out less and they prefer house parties actually, and because people want more responsible drinking as opposed to sort of the crazy drinking that is associated with parties and nightclubs and things like that. That's why I think home bartending still has a role. Although people are not drinking as much now in the United States as they were previously, people still want that social interaction. People still want to have 1 or 2 drinks responsibly with their friends and family and loved ones. So that's why it still has a role. And of course, you can also learn mocktails and virgin cocktails as well. So you can really appeal to those kind of people, to people that are sober and want to still enjoy your party. So there's really ways to get around it. I think home bartending is still valuable. I think it's more valuable probably now than even it was in 2020 because, like I said, people are not going out as much. They want to do they want to do house parties and things like that, these smaller events. And also people care a lot more about responsible drinking. I would say it's not just necessarily that people are drinking, are cutting out drinking completely. They're not just completely going sober. What they want is more of that responsible drinking, and home bartending facilitates that. So for those 2 reasons, I think home bartending is actually more important in 2025, in a year when people are drinking less than ever before. It's actually more important because of those 2 reasons. So that's why I think it's still a worthwhile hobby to get into. I've still had experience, making cocktails for other people, hosting parties, going to other people's events and bartending at those events. That's still gone on in my life in 2025 the same way it was in 2020 and 2021 and these previous years I've known home bartending. So anyways, that's all I have for today's video. If you found the advice in this video helpful, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I like to do 2 styles of videos on this channel. One will be tutorials on how to make specific cocktails, and the second style of video will be like this video, where I share stories from my own home bartending journey. I do guides on different bartending topics, or I just give general advice and tips and tricks, or tackle important issues in home bartending and general stuff like that too. So if you found the advice helpful, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And anyways, that's all I have for today's video. Thank you. Cheers.